Thank you for joining us for this final session of ISE 2019. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about AV network security. My name is Tim Albright. I am the host of AV Week, a weekly news digest program covering the AV industry for AV Nation TV, partnering with AV Magazine, so I'd like to thank them for having us. With me to discuss this, first and foremost, from my left to around is Chris Fitzsimmons from Biamp.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Karen Lipschitz from Kramer. Welcome, ma'am.
Hello.
Rudy Tabuti from Harman.
Hello.
Hello. And John Pavlik from Crestron.
Hello.
Hello. So here's kind of how this came up. A number of years ago, I guess about 20, let's just round it out, some fine AV manufacturers started putting RJ45s on the back of devices. You weren't there at
I
that.
I was barely alive.
You were not barely alive. You were covering the industry. And it was fantastic, right? We were able to control and monitor and do some really wicked things on the network, and it was unique and it was fantastic. I want to say it was 2001, 2002. A dear friend of mine that actually works for Crestron still has a picture in his phone of the word convergence over the entrance to Infocom. Again, 2001, 2002, somewhere in there. And we started talking about this whole AV on the network thing. And as we are wont to do in the AV industry, we find something and we jump onto it. And whether there's any rhyme or reason to it, we keep doing it. Such is the case with this. So what started out as being basic information and then control and monitoring has turned into audio on the network and video on the network and control on the network, to the point that others outside the industry have taken note. I'll reference this in a bit, but one of the main events over the last 5 years of just basic network security and the failure of one is a DDoS attack that happened in the fall of 2016. It was a bunch of botnets network that took down the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. Things like Netflix went down and Amazon went down. And the reason for that is that a bunch of devices that are on the network were taken control by bad actors. If you look at the post-mortem on that attack, there's a piece of AV equipment right smack dab in the center. None of yours, by the way, just want to point that out. And not that it was a manufacturer's fault either, right? There's somebody had installed it and left the default password or no password at all on this device, and suddenly you have a network-enabled speaker acting as a bad actor and taking down a network. So, with kind of that in mind, we're going to talk about how to, honestly, how to be better citizens of the network, and how we make our networks better. John, I'm going to start with you on this first one, though. Describe for me, in your opinion, whether Crestron's opinion or your opinion, how do you create a best practice for designing a secure network in an AV environment?
Well, there's really a few things that you have to start with. I think the first question is, what are your goals and what are you trying to secure in the first place? Certainly, as time has gone on, we've gone from mostly maintenance being over network to control being over network, and now to AV being over the network. And that certainly changed the game a lot, because the data and assets that we're trying to protect have changed over the years. And so depending on what those factors are, we really have to keep those in mind and start to dig in, because we don't necessarily want to lose functionality. We're trying to always provide the most functionality that we can, but that's sometimes counterproductive to actually securing the network. One of the other things that we have to consider is the physical security of the devices as well.
Okay.
Open ports, certainly the U.S. military for years has been sticking hot glue into USB ports, and it's something that they have to do. And certainly in our industry, we haven't really seen that, unless except for those of us who are working in those military installations. But it's something that probably needs to be considered a lot more, because we do have a lot of equipment that sits in credenzas. Are those credenzas locked? We have touch panels outside of meeting rooms and classrooms. Can they be removed from the wall? Can somebody get into an internet port and get access to that device? And so really understanding the landscape of what we're trying to protect and how we have to protect it is the first step. And then it's a matter of going through and securing against all of those threats.
All right, Rudy, same thing. How do you label this out?
Yeah, so for me it's all about, and I hope you can hear me okay, but for me it's all about starting with the actual boxes.
Okay.
You can't ship a box that's got ports enabled by default, security disabled, all those sort of things, right? You got to ship with something that's already solid to begin with. Certainly, as John pointed out, there's going to be some cases where customers are going to want to do some crazy things, and that's okay. But given that in this industry, I would say it's relatively young in terms of network security, I'd rather give them the ability to maybe turn something off because it fits their need or it's not necessary for them than to make that decision for them. So doing things like that is really good. You mentioned the bot attack. Really the number one best practice there is to, whenever you've configured a new device, the very first thing you do is change that default password. The default password is in every user manual. Anybody can download it anywhere at any given time. So just doing a simple thing like changing your password, keeping the firmware up to date on those devices regularly. I know that's difficult in our industry. You have to be very disciplined at doing it, but it's the same concepts because we're all here, we're all putting new firmware that's protecting us and the products from security vulnerabilities. So being able to make sure you do that fairly regularly. I think lastly, it's a communication on our side. We need to let our customers know that we've got an issue and hey, you might want to update that firmware to block something. Hackers are out there, all they're trying to do is find ways to exploit any type of system.
Yeah. From a manufacturer standpoint, is there something where you guys can force that? You force the changing of the password? Or is that going to break stuff?
You know, you can force some changes. You know, it's very rudimentary things like when they first log in, just say before you can do anything else, you got to change that password. That's a good first step.
Yeah.
People don't like it. I know myself, I hate going on my phone and having to change my password every few months, but you get used to it. So it's part of that, just gradually getting them used to doing that. And then again, if we as manufacturers can create products that just ship default security enabled, then that's just the way it works. There's no reason otherwise.
Yeah. Karen, lay out for me some best practices.
Well, first of all, I agree with my fellows here. We should treat the AV network as we are treating our IT network. And I think AV network should be on a separate network and not on the company network. I prefer creating always a separate VLAN and putting all the devices. So even if a disaster happens, it's still being controlled on a separate network with an Active Directory, and you have to log into the network and use it as any IT network. You will never treat an IT network today as you are treating the AV. But I think most of us do not pay enough attention to the AV, the actual AV. We look at the RJ45 of the network or the control, but we don't look at the HDMI or DisplayPort port, which actually they are vulnerable as well. So the HDMI and DisplayPort, they carry with them data. It's a bidirectional line. You can actually add to the balcony any information you want, and then you can put into the system viruses. Then once it's with the video frame, it's accessing your either matrix switcher, it's already in your network, and you don't need any username or password in order to enter your network, just to get a HDMI cable. And let's assume I'm a visitor, I'm coming with my own laptop. Everyone will be very happy to give me an HDMI cable to connect, right, in the meeting room. No one will give me the username and password to the company network. Once I have the HDMI cable, I have a full access. And this is something people don't think of. We are AV people, we are not IT, we don't think about the balcony. For us, the balcony is InfoFrame, EDID, HDCP. What keeps hackers from putting anything inside? Then, even if it's not a matrix switcher, I can send a virus. It will, even if I get a direct cable from the display to the laptop, then I can put a virus on the display. The second person is coming, maybe he has a company computer, he connects to the display, it comes back to his laptop, and from that, he's on the company network.
Yeah, he's compromised.
Yeah. And there are solutions in the market. There are isolators with a single direction communication which strip the data from the HDMI. So we should consider that as well as a threat.
Interesting. Okay. Chris, I want to start with you on this. These, they've given us some good kind of baselines, but this evolves, right? Karen brings up the point of the HDMI. 20 years ago, that wasn't a possibility.
It was
right.
it was analog.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you four, as well as your customers, keep up to date on security best practices, threats that are out there? How do they keep their skills sharp and their employees sharp?
So I think there's a couple of pieces. First, there's training, right? That you need to have responsible individuals who are dedicated to, because like all technologies, there is a ton of information out there, a ton of things to keep up with. As a product manager, you can't possibly watch everything, so you need to have someone in your organization who's responsible for tracking that kind of stuff. And that's true at the customer side too, right? They need security experts, or they need to have an IT guy who's responsible for that. And then the second part is communicating. Like forums like this where vendors and customers and integrators can share information and ideas and threats are really important. The security industry has its kind of white hat hacking conferences, and that kind of forum, I think, for an AV market would be really interesting. I think the other part of it is just being as honest as possible with each other. Like there's this whole...
I mean, you mean...
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We should be sharing information about things we know are bad. Like, the whole Meltdown Spectre chipset debacle from Intel was frightening and weird for the lack of information from AV vendors about whether they were vulnerable or not. There was this kind of reluctance, and you have to be transparent. Security is not about hiding information. Right? It's about protecting customers' businesses and IP and their operations. Pretending you don't have a problem and disguising the existence of a problem does not do anyone any favors. Because you can guarantee that the bad guy out there knows about the problem anyway, right? He's on some dark net information sharing website, sharing ideas with his buddies about how to break things. If we as vendors are aware of vulnerabilities, we're probably not doing our job properly if we don't act upon them, share them. Like if we're buying the same chip from the same vendor and we find a problem, we really should be exchanging information.
Yeah.
So really, it sounds perverse, but really the best way to move security forward is to be transparent, right? Share information with the customers, be upfront, say, hey, we found a vulnerability, here's an update, or there will be an update, or don't do this. Hiding it and expecting the fact that you're hiding it from your customer is going to have hidden it from a hacker is nonsense. Absolute nonsense.
No. John, is this something that Chris makes a good point about sharing information that we could utilize in a organization like Avixa or Cedia on the residential side to get that information out there? Or, because, hey, this is, to Chris's point, there's a vulnerability, internally maybe. I know Avixa has manufacturers' councils, right, where all you guys can sit in the same room. But in addition to that, providing things like training. We've kind of joked before, on my show about having a CTS N for the network, right? There's a CTS, there's a CTS installer, there's a CTS designer. It may be time to start approaching a CTS network. Is this something that we can lean on Avixa for, or is this something beyond just the AV part and IT overall?
Well, I think certainly the AV industry itself has challenges in terms of making sure that people are aware of the resources that are outside of our industry, and that's one of the challenges. I know recently at Crestron we moved all of our security information from being in our password-protected online help to being part of our public-facing website. Wow. So we did that a few months ago now, and we'll be continuing to enhance that and move the information out to the public. I do think that there's a benefit in us as manufacturers sharing information. It's certainly when you come along with some of these problems, it's good to know that others are having these problems, as well as being able to share solutions and information about them. So I do think that there's probably some use in using our existing industry organizations like Avixa to be able to share those sort of information. So.
Yeah. Rudy, where can folks keep sharp on these skills?
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of online content for learning about security issues. From Berkeley has a great website that always publishes a lot of things about what's going on security-wise. I agree with the communication thing because frankly it does neither of us good. If we get hit with a meltdown virus, I mean, and we didn't share that information or make use of that information or learn of something. So I totally agree. I think that makes sense. The other thing we can do as manufacturers is, back to the training point that Chris made, is we also need to train our developers. They need to understand good, secure coding practices. And that's something that you normally don't think about. They're out there coding, fixing something, making something talk to something else. I'm done. No, there's a lot of things you can do from secure coding practices, and that's training that I think all of our teams need to be able to do to support those. Because the sooner you can start, it's almost like a small little stem or bud. If it germinates, it's going to be in trouble. You're only as secure as your least secure part of your network, right?
No.
So.
To that point, real quick, and all four of you can answer this. Training your coders, but it would also benefit the industry to also kind of retrain and start to train our programmers. I say that as somebody who used to be a programmer, right? So
Yes.
training them on best practices, because let's be frank, there are some folks out there been doing this for 20 and 30 years on some of your platforms that they may not have gone back to school for security best practices when they're writing the control codes.
Yes.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there, because all of us are now using more what I would call mainstream programming
Yep.
languages. None of us are using the proprietary stuff we used 10, 15 years ago, just because it's hard to find programmers who can do that kind of stuff. So with all the benefits you get with more programmers able to code to your systems, you're right. That means there's more people, there's more hackers that have access to that same type of code and know how to exploit them.
Yep.
So, fair point.
All right, Karen, the word firmware has been uttered a couple of times. Now, I am not a manufacturer. I have never worked for a manufacturer, and I've been told by manufacturers that I'm wrong on this next question. So, I'm going to ask all four of you this one, and you guys can jump in if you'd like. Is it time to stop calling security updates firmware updates? And what I mean by that is this. You go to a client, any client, but we're going to pick on the government, and I don't care which government in the world you're talking to. And you tell them you have a firmware update for their system. There is a very slim chance, if it's a secure room, that you're going to get in there to update the firmware. If you tell them that you have a security update to their system, the response, in my experience, will be vastly different. So should we stop calling security updates for AV equipment firmware updates?
The question is it integrated into the firmware or it's separate? Because
And that's the argument I keep getting.
so naturally, because if the result is the same, so you are calling the same child in different ways, right? Because it doesn't matter if it's a bug fix, it's a new feature, or if it's a security update, you still need to update the firmware. As a result, you still need to access the device, which sits in a secured environment,
Yep.
connect a mass storage device coming from the outside to a product which was already in a secured environment and might have inside, from any reasons, secured the information, and you will not get the access.
Yeah.
So as long as we do not separate the access, look, if you will look at, for example, secured KVM switcher, it has two boards. One is the system board and one is the USB board.
Okay.
So a secured KVM switcher, you will never be able to access to the system board for updates, but you will be able to access the USB board for updates, because it doesn't contain any memory and you cannot access any information which might pass in the device. So if we will decide that our devices will have separate memory and processor and everything for the system, which is firmware update, and then a separate memory for security updates or anything that doesn't require accessing the data, that's fine. Then you can call it a security update and you will get an access.
Okay.
I think this just comes back to the transparency question, right? We should be calling spades spades. If you have a need to fix a security issue, you should be telling your customer there's a security issue that you're going to fix, not hiding it and saying, hey, it's a feature upgrade. It is a firmware update that includes a security fix. That's, I think, the transparent way to do it. I totally get your point about architecting products in a secure fashion, but then that comes down to applicable market. a university or a retail
Bank
environment is
or a
doesn't
hospital
yeah,
or
they're going to
any-
pay for it, but certain other customers don't want to. And then there's this, which leads us to this other question of kind of leadership from manufacturers and trying to bring people forward a bit. We have to, we have to sell stuff, right? That's what we're here to do and create great product. And we have to bring with us our customers, otherwise they're not going to. So kind of, we have this delicate balance to make, which is to lead and to provide a good example and to provide education, whilst not just alienating people with difficult things. We recently released a product that doesn't allow Telnet because we don't. Telnet is not a safe thing. It's not secure. It's a really bad plan. And we had lots of people complain, you don't do this with Telnet. I'm like, I'm not. And it's kind of me being dad, right? It's like, Telnet's a really bad plan. Don't do it. Please don't do it. But you then get people that are upset because you move the cheese.
Because it's
And
incredibly
they have to
useful
change
to folks,
behaviors.
yeah.
They have to learn something new. So there's a real tension there between the right thing, the leadership, the thought leadership position, and serving customers who get bent out of shape because they can't have what they used to have. So
Real quickly, because you've said that a couple of times, is it not the manufacturer's position to be leaders on this?
yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Because you guys are the ones that make the products that we all put in.
I mean, but sometimes that's awkward, right? Because we can make a decision to not do something, or Crestron can make a decision to not do something, and then the guy just says, well, I'll just go to Harman, or I'll go to AMX, or I'll go wherever. And that's where this whole communication and leadership thing has to come in. We have to agree we're going to stop doing stupid thing X en masse. And then that helps everyone lift, the tide rises, all the boats rise, and the industry succeeds, the customer succeeds. But if we don't behave in that way, then that's when it gets challenging, and someone will choose the old unsecure thing or not do the firmware update. Like we struggle with customers that don't want to do firmware update. They're like, well, it's working just fine on 2.6, and you guys are on 4.0, and it's a pain in my backside. Forcing them to do firmware updates is just going to irritate them.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of, it's parenting. It sounds really patronizing, but that's actually what it is. It's about being a responsible leader and a partner with your customer,
No.
and helping them understand what the benefit is of doing that.
Yeah.
All right, John.
To that point, I think for years we told people not to update firmware if they didn't have any problems, or if they
Don't
didn't
try
need
that.
a particular
It's fine, it's
feature.
working, don't touch
And
it.
and actually, we do a lot of training, obviously, and one of the things we've added is a lot of security training. And so I was doing some last year, and I talked about the need to update firmware and add these security patches and so forth. And so, of course, I got questioned on it, but you told us not to. And one of the things that I told them was that you have to, if security is a feature that's important to you, that's the reason to upgrade, right? So if you're on an isolated network and nothing's going to touch you, then sure, you don't necessarily need to follow every single upgrade. And then I might actually say, no, continue what you're doing. If it's working, leave it alone. But it is important that people understand their threat model and what could possibly happen. So as far as whether we call it a firmware update or a security update, I think the key thing is we make sure that in our release notes and notifications that things are coming up, that it says this contains security updates. We recommend that you do update it, and that information is on our site as well.
You do realize that we don't read the release notes, right?
I do. That's why.
Okay.
That's why we try to send out notifications. We try to
What
put
would
it
be a
in
better
bold
medium?
letters.
Do you want like
Podcasting.
interpretive dance or videos of the release notes read by comedians? What's
That would
the-
be awesome.
We may have to do click-through
mine. I
release
called that
notes,
one.
but nobody
We're
will
doing
read
that
those either.
Yeah,
So
little captures and stuff.
that's right.
All right, Rudy. Release note or release notes. Firmware update versus security update.
Yeah, I think, like if you look at our industry, we're evolving. We used to do exactly that. Hey, if it's not broke, don't touch it. It's great. The only time they typically wanted to touch it was when they had to add something new.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, okay, let me go call my integrator again to help out. Well, that world's changed. We're living it right now. As we're sitting here, I'm sure all our phones have received probably some app update. And so I think the fact of the matter is most people understand that that's going to happen. So for us, it's incumbent on us when we create those updates, whether you call it firmware or Mickey Mouse for that matter. It's got to be something that is benign, gets done very quickly, and more important, it still keeps on working afterwards. You got to have our people gain confidence in us that when we do push an update to them, it's not going to break their system or have them on the support call for the next day. So if we can do that, then I think a lot of these problems go away.
We referenced the DDoS attack that happened in the fall of 16. Again, it was in North America and the Eastern Seaboard. In that attack, a gentleman by the name of Krebs on Security, posted the list of devices that were on that part of that botnet. And most of them were things that you would somewhat kind of figure, there were a bunch of IP cameras, DVRs, stuff like that. And right smack dab in the middle was a two-way network-enabled speaker, right? Not to get too much in the weeds on this, the way that is compromised is, you guys said it, they had physical access to it, whether that's physically or they had network access to it. The default password was either not changed or there wasn't one at all. And so this two-way speaker was part of this botnet attack. Not to throw the manufacturer under the bus or the integrator under the bus, because I have no idea who the integrator was on this. The only reason I know the manufacturer is because it was listed on Krebs' site. Karen, the last person to touch a network or a network device is the one most responsible. Really smart security people have told me this over the years. They've written about this. How do we get the integrators, the people, the system integrators, the commercial integrators, the folks putting this stuff in, how do we get them to raise their game and start creating really, really secure AV networks?
I think that in the end of the day, if you enforce or if you have regulations and they are enforced, then people will start to behave the way you want them to behave.
Government regulation, manufacturer regulation, industry
that's the
regulation.
question. So I think it should be industry regulations, first of all. Convincing a government to create a regulation, we will sit here 10 years from now. And
I'm from the States. We do it all the time.
We'll discuss it again. But I
They
think as an
probably-
industry, and my fellows here talked about transparency and working together. So creating a consortium where all manufacturers sit together, define the risks, understand together what we can do, because in the end of the day, all our devices are working together. They are all IoT devices in the end. They have to speak with each other. So if we cannot have one manufacturer deciding on certain steps while the other is not, because he will the one that won't will compromise anyway, all of us. So if we decide that this is important enough, create a consortium, define the step that has to be taken and implement them, and define the training that has to be done, certification program, enforcement program. So if you are a manufacturer and you are not complying with the regulations that we have as an industry together decided to apply, then you will not be part of our network, and people probably will not buy you if you are not part of it. If we will do it together, it will succeed.
All right, Chris?
So I agree with all of that. I think in some ways it has to come from the customer, because the way to, and I mean by that I mean the end customer, not the integrator, but our ultimate end user. I think the way that manufacturers are generally best motivated is by the customer base, right? By a commitment to buy or not buy your stuff. So, and what's really interesting to me is that there's a class of customer right now that is bang on this, banks and law firms, and those guys are super hot on security. They want to know what ports do what's open, what's not, what memory do you use, all this kind of stuff. They're very rigorous. I think the challenge really is the tier below that, the guys that have valuable information but don't have security policies themselves. I think that's a really challenging segment of the market for us. So we have to, I think the end user base has to demand better from us, and then we can deliver it. I think it's very difficult. I would love for us to do what you just described. I think manufacturers are challenged by that. So we probably need a kick up the pants to make that happen. In general, I think we need to make it easier for our customers. Like our integrators, we need to help them make the right decisions. Like we have to agree on password standards. That's like a basic. You shouldn't be able to set a password in a modern AV device that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That device should tell you to get lost and do something else.
And
right?
back to what Rudy was saying earlier, should you force the client, force the integrator to change it?
I think at that basic level of lowest common denominator stuff, websites force you to do that, Facebook forces you to do that. they're already the customer is already used to that behavior elsewhere. We just need to kind of suck it up and get on with it and say there is a minimum password standard and there is a requirement to not do this and not use Telnet. And
Disable auto discovery.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? We don't need to, and we don't even need to agree to do those things in some clever consortium. We could just get on with it, right? That's as a product owner, as a product manager, I have the power to do that, so we should just be doing it. I don't have to get permission to like make a smart
Exactly.
but we should be discussing what those baseline levels are. We really should.
Absolutely. John, how do we raise the bar for integrators and security?
Well, certainly the end user poll, I agree, is one of the biggest factors, and we see it all the time. We have been trying to push out a lot of security training for our integrators, enhancing the curriculum, teaching coding standards both to AV programmers as well as our own internal programmers. And it takes a lot of training and pushing of information to make people aware. Once they're aware, I think most people are willing to do it, but I think in a lot of cases they are somewhat ignorant of what the problems are, and so they're not looking for the solutions. They don't even realize that they have a problem in many cases. And so we need to be upfront and transparent about here are the problems that you will have if you do not do these things. And if we get that message out, I think it'll at least push some more people to implement the security practices that we put in place.
I just had an idea.
Yes.
We should schedule this panel for like lunchtime on day one.
I have
Next
no
time,
control.
instead of like 3 p.m. on a
have
Friday.
We,
no
we are
control.
recording
Many
it,
more
so
people hearing the
hopefully other
message.
people will see it too
Yeah,
as
that'd
well,
be awesome.
besides the
Pay
people in this
attention.
room.
Pay
So.
attention. Rudy, I want to wrap up here before we take some questions, because Karen and a couple of you guys have mentioned this scenario. You guys are all what I would consider a tier one manufacturer, right? And not to disparage anybody, I'm not going to throw anybody bus or name any names. There are certainly other manufacturers out there that are they do things less secure, let's say, that are going to be less expensive, right? And certain segments and certain customers and clients will certainly go down the value engineered route, right? That's not always the most secure. What should we as a community, what should we as an industry do with those devices that continually compromise our networks?
Well, I think it starts with leadership. I mean, like you mentioned, there's us here, tier one type manufacturers. We have to lead with product that is secure out of the box. Bottom line, if you have something that's
You guys set the bar.
we set the bar. That's basically what I'm saying. Because, back to the point that everybody made earlier. I mean, if I kind of give you a new product to an integrator and say this is how you install it, this is how you do it, and those steps happen to have a lot of security built in, then you're in good shape.
No.
I think as this industry's evolved, that wasn't always the case. You took a product that maybe wasn't as secure, maybe just the media was secure, but nothing else. Then you didn't worry about the other stuff because you were trying, I'm an integrator, I'm trying to get something to top the other thing and make it work. And that's what they're interested in.
Yeah.
But if we can almost dumb down these products where they're just secure, where they can't, there's not a way for them to make it insecure or very easily unless there's just some critical thing they had to do, which does come up. But for the most part, kind of dumb it down for them so they can continue to do what they do best as they transition into this IT world. I came from a world 15, 20 years ago where it was a similar thing. I came from the voice side a long time ago, and there was another, what I call another thing that happened where you had a bunch of IT admins and you had these voice guys, and little by little it became the IT admin guy. I think we're almost headed down the same path in this industry. You're already seeing, as a matter of fact. And so creating these products, giving those guys an understanding of what it takes to be secure, not letting them do things like enabling Telnet. I think that's a fantastic thing, Chris. I'm the same way. I would never enable Telnet. You're not going to be able to enable. You can't even enable Telnet on one of our products moving forward. So things like that, that's how you lead with this thing, and I think that's how you start to change direction.
And something I would add to that is, again, I used to be a programmer, and I would use Telnet, just for the record. But again, this is
It's
10,
okay, we forgive
10
you.
years ago, though. No, seriously, 10 years ago, it was because it was a fantastic tool for what we were trying to do, but it was incredibly unsecure.
Right.
Right. And there are old school programmers who don't understand that and don't get that, and part of that is educating them on why you're doing it.
That's
right?
right.
There are also control processes out there that can only use it.
Yeah.
And that's when we come unstuck. It's like, oh, I want to use this control. It only speaks Telnet. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm not going to fix that for you.
Right.
All right, Karen, what do we do with rogue devices and rogue manufacturers who continue to jeopardize the network?
In a perfect world, I will block them from connecting to my device. But hey, it's not a perfect world, and
But you could do that, though. I mean,
yeah, but then people will not buy my Matrix switcher because it doesn't work with this device or that device. So people here already said that we are being dominated by the market and the needs. So education is, I think, the main point. You need to explain to them that they are compromising their network.
Yeah.
We cannot block them, but we can give them all the tools. It's like children. You cannot prevent them from doing mistakes, but you can try and give them all the tools not to.
yeah. And you kind of already mentioned the fact, blocking Telnet, but
It's end customer education, right? We can't tell other companies how to run their businesses or build the products they want to build, and we certainly can't tell customers what to do or how they should do stuff. We can just help them with information, right? If you are concerned about security and your business is concerned about security, then buy products that do these things,
Right.
and don't buy products that don't do these things, right? We can't go around and tell every vendor, "Oh, you're going to stop selling that thing because it doesn't comply with my my idea of what security should look like." It has to be organic. So the best thing we can do is provide education and provide conversation and things for people to read and understand and learn and case study, whatever it is. That's we have to evangelize for it. Because we won't change behavior without education and like I said earlier, you have to explain
Great.
why. Why is this important? What's the risk? There are plenty of businesses where there isn't much risk, right? And they're perfectly content to knowingly take a risk because it's low and the hazard is low and they're
and the cost is still high.
right. The cost is
basically,
low, right? So they're like, okay, I am going to go buy a cheaper unsecured product because it's not important, and that's fine. But if you have a valuable business and you are concerned about it, then here are the choices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John?
Well, we've talked about training and training programmers and integrators. But I also said that we consider security a feature, and so as a result, we make sure that the sales and marketing channels promote secure products,
Good point.
right?
That's a good
So
point.
if our sales team is selling our product, saying this is the most secure thing that you have on the market, then people are aware of what's secure and what isn't, and that's probably the only way to drive it up. Is if people stop buying unsecure products, is the only way that that's actually going to get rid of those from the market.
All right, very good. We have a couple minutes for any questions. Yes, sir.
I've got a background in network security before I started my AV install business. So
Hang on, throw me that.
Throw in the box.
John, throw me that.
I have a solution for that. We can use it
Yes,
next
you
year.
do.
take it as a microphone.
Yes.
So I started my business after I got masters in network security. I'm also ex-military as well. So I'm sitting talking to other installers as part of a group that I'll not mention at the moment. And these installers point blank refuse to get involved with network security. They say to me that it's the client that needs to get someone else in to do it because they don't have the time. So network security is a trade in its own that needs to have an element of audiovisual people and that network security element as its own trade that installers can bring in, because the installers themselves don't have the time to configure a system. There's so many different products on the market.
Yeah.
They can't, to add that element of network security to their daily job really becomes impossible for them. That's what they perceive, so from an installer's perspective, I think they're aware the network security exists. I think they're terrified of it because they don't realise the amount of work that's actually involved. Do you know what I mean? I just thought I'd point that out because it's something I've been preaching about for a long time. Certain organisations are also teaching network security the week after they've done the course. So it's taken me 10 years to get to that point.
Yeah.
So it's certainly something that's on the radar. But
Let me
Scared
kind of ask it a different way real quick. can we, as an industry, I guess, and work with integrators where we develop a new job? You go to a job site, you've got programmers, you've got cable pullers, you have folks who are commissioning the system, you've got green techs, you've got level 1 techs.
You've got
Is
ethical
it
hackers
time
as
for
well.
network security, an AV network security tech, or adding that to an existing tech's job
go-
description?
You go to any business, regardless small or large, and the ethical hacking courses are becoming prevalent, you know. And for these big businesses, they bring in penetration testers to test their business. It has to be CREST certified and all this kind of stuff, or they don't get their ISO standards and so on and so on. And that's what this industry needs. It needs people that are professional security AV techs, exactly as you said, and that's their career path.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that, AV installers don't have the time for this. They just, I do it, and I struggle to maintain the network security thing, but that's my first focus, not an afterthought.
So I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think two things. Yeah, I think there's definitely a need, whether it be the existing installer or another position that understands network security. Certainly if you're deploying into an enterprise environment, they're going to have somebody that knows that. So that's not going to be as much of a thing. But when you're installing these little smaller installs in stores or SMBs or places like that, they probably won't. So either we got to, as manufacturers, provide the product in a way that when you install it, it is secure, because you can't install it otherwise. That helps a lot. But having said that, it's not perfect, because more than likely you're installing to another environment that's got a lot of other gear in it.
Well, the home network in this day and age really is, or has become, an enterprise level network with the amount of devices that are on it, you know. And I think, exactly as you said, in an enterprise level network, security is absolutely prevalent in that. It's a major focus. So I think if we can stop having a barrier there and it's just one and the same, it's an enterprise level network in a house.
Yeah.
I do think that we have to make it easier for people to apply the specific policies. So while we could certainly add default security levels onto our devices, there's also other things that may be optional based on the circumstances. So whether it's 802.1x certificates or LDAP integration, we ended up creating some tools so that you can choose between a few different profiles, scan the devices, and it'll let you know which ones are not secured in according to these particular policies, and then give you easy ways to update it, so it doesn't take as much time from the integrators. Because I agree with you, because we've had secure deployment guides for years, but they're lengthy documents, and you have to understand what you're doing in order to be able to use them. And so providing tools to our integrators to be able to quickly check and against the particulars of the install.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes,
Thanks very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to pick up on a couple of things we mentioned about, Karen mentioned about getting the industry together, and also for that chap said there, people do penetration test their network, they can get it certified. Shouldn't we as manufacturers, because I am as one as well, have some sort of certification scheme which we could label on the box? That would make it easy for customers. They would see that my product, your products, were certified to a particular standard. And I again agree with Chris, they don't get to turn off the features that have made that certification a thing. So for me, the concept of having an industry body establishing what the baseline rules are, okay, you can go beyond that if you wish, but this should be a minimum standard, should be able to put a label on the box like CE certification. After all, the customers don't understand the safety aspects of your product, they shouldn't have to. They can see it from a label. Surely we should do the same.
I think that's a good idea. To John's point about making security understandable, I think that helps, right? You don't want to have to read through the documentation for every device and check all the ports off, and does it do that? It'd be nice to know this thing means this thing is safe. I don't know how we make that happen, but it does seem like a sensible, I mean, and you know, we're a manufacturing industry, we like labels and badges and alliances, so why not have another one?
Yes, absolutely. All right, guys, thank you so much. John Pavlik from Crestron, thank you, sir. Rudy Djibouti from Harman, thank you. Karen Lipschitz from Kramer, thank you. And Chris Fitzsimmons from Biome, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you again to Avixa and Cedia and ISE and AV Magazine, for helping us. Again, my name is Tim Albright from AV Nation. You can find me at avnation.tv or hanging out with the AV Magazine folks. So, all right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.